So, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Saira and I'm from Muslim Hands. Today we are joined by Sister Minha from Inspirited Minds, and we're going to be talking about the importance of mental health and, really delving into two disorders, which are seasonal affective disorder and the winter blues. At the moment, we're experiencing winter, the weather is cold, there's been a mixture of snow, there's Storm Christoph, and, we're experiencing the darker mornings and nights. And on top of this, we're also experiencing a pandemic. So people are really struggling even more now so than ever. And as I was kind of researching around this topic and going on the Inspirited Minds website and finding a lot more about what they've been doing, the following quote from the United Nations popped up, and that is that the pandemic has been the most challenging crisis since the Second World War. And this really puts into perspective of how important it is that we talk about mental health, and that is not something that we should attach to shame or stigma, and that we look after ourselves, that we talk about how we're feeling. And if we feel that something's not right, that we reach out to the medical professionals as soon as possible. And we do everything in our power to make sure that we're living well and that we're living better, especially during this time. And before we start the interview, I just want to point out that myself and Sister Minha, we're not medical professionals. And so if you feel like during this interview that there's something that you resonated with or you want to find out a bit more about, please do seek advice from your doctor, and they can put you in touch with the right people. So without further ado, we're going to be starting the conversation around the winter blues. So thank you, Sister Minha, for joining us tonight. So the first question I wanted to start off with is, who are Inspirited Minds?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair, Sister Sarah and Muslim Hands for hosting myself and Inspirited Minds. So Inspirited Minds is a Muslim mental health charity. We were founded in 2014 with the aim to raise awareness, combat stigma around mental health in our culture and our community, and provide professional, sort of non-judgmental and confidential support to those in our community who are struggling with their mental health and well-being. Our initial research showed that many Muslims found it difficult to reach out for support, as they felt they wouldn't be understood by someone who doesn't understand their faith or their culture. And so more often than not, they would choose to remain quiet and sort of not seek help. So Inspirited Minds was sort of birthed out of that to bridge that gap and fulfill that need. And we sort of aim to cater for as many people within our community as possible. So we have a weekly newsletter, regular community training and workshops, a monthly podcast. We've got a support service and a counselling service. So yeah, we're also developing our research around mental health in the Muslim community to evaluate our work and also to understand how best we can cater for those who need us.
Brilliant. So you touched on mental health, and you touched on that, there are people within the Muslim community that don't feel like they can have a conversation. Why is it important that we talk about the topic on mental health, and why is it important in our society today overall, but in the Muslim society?
So, I think it's important in general because it's our existence, right? It's our presence. It's how we carry ourselves in our day-to-day lives. But I think now more than ever, it's becoming, more people are becoming more aware of it, of their mental health and their own well-being, as well as the mental health and well-being of those around them. And it's also somewhat, become quote unquote trend to talk about mental health and well-being, which is great. And it's about time as well, but the right kinds of conversation with the most appropriate guidance and advice needs to be had. And also our current way of living isn't compatible with what we were created to do, like when we're trying to achieve the most healthiest and positive mindset. So for example, like the need for immediate gratification is becoming more and more apparent in our community as well. Our attention spans, for example, like everything is 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Everyone wants small digestible amounts of information, and when we can't get that, our brain just goes haywire. The need for validation from others, unrealistic beauty ideals, for example, the strive for money, and individualism. And as we know, Islam is a very collectivist religion. So so on and so forth. So I think that's why it's so important to talk about it, and that's why it's becoming more and more apparent in our community and our society.
Yeah, I mean, often people in certain cultures, they probably don't know much about what depression is or feeling low. And, they may think that it's something that we can easily get over, or on the opposite spectrum, they may think that it's just something, taboo to talk about. Why do you think there's such a stigma around the topic of mental health? And do you think this is changing? You touched upon that it is changing, that people are talking about it. But do you think there's still a stigma? Do you think people are still reserved to say, I think, there's something's not right. And, I think that, maybe I need to seek advice. And so what do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I agree. But I mean, I think this could be answered in twofold. Yeah. So one being that certain cultures around the world probably do experience symptoms of depression, anxiety, PTSD. Trauma is a big one in Muslim communities as well. Yeah. But there isn't a name for it as such. And so when we give it a label, it suddenly becomes an unknown. It suddenly becomes a Western problem because the West loves the label, for example. And it suddenly becomes a medical issue that's no longer something to just deal with, which is often why you get people of the elder generation, our uncles, our aunties, our parents saying, well, I had to deal with such and such, but I didn't give up. You didn't see me, sleeping. I still had to earn for the family. Yeah. They'd often say, I don't know what depression is. I didn't become depressed, and you often get the whole, I had to walk 10 miles to get to school and, all that sort of stuff. So number one is I think that it's just unknown and it's unnamed. The second being that it's unknown in terms of language, which is quite the opposite if we think about what our rich Islamic history would suggest. So, for example, you can see we had many famous physicians that were expert in what we would call nowadays psychology and psychiatry. But in those days, they were polymaths. They didn't see, they didn't make a distinction between body, mind, and soul like there is in today's society. So I think the stigma around the topic of mental health, I think, is often to do with portrayals that we get in the media, as well as people in our own community, misconception, lack of information is a big one, and scaremongering. A lot of people often think, I went to Bangladesh a few years ago, and I wanted to go and visit like a hospital where people who were clinically unwell. And it was, there was this notion that like crazy is contagious. Is, all that kind of scaremongering. So, but I do think it is changing, and I have hope that it's changing, especially amongst young adults and the change makers within our society. Because they're becoming more and more exposed to current conversations and how to have those conversations actually. And as our, aunties and our uncles and our parents and our grandparents, they become more technologically advanced, which is, it's almost like a double-edged sword, because, you'll get people sharing videos on WhatsApp on saying like black tea will cure corona, for example. Yeah. But equally, that technological advancement is a gateway for them to have more current and meaningful conversation, as well as, have easier access to information. Yeah. Like, for example, in different languages, you can get translated nowadays. Yeah. So I do believe it's changing, but I do believe it needs to be the right kinds of conversations and not conversations that are fueling the stigma and the stereotypes more. We need to make sure that, support is widely accessible for those in our communities.
Yeah, no, and you mentioned one of the points that I was going to say, that, I think, the previous generations, didn't know, that they may have experienced it, they must have experienced it, but they didn't know what it was because it wasn't really talked about. And again, language barrier as well. people not understanding that something like this does exist, or, you know, there's no conversations around it. And, you know, when you go to your local doctors, things are in many different languages as well. So people of other generations, of the previous generations, are able to kind of understand a bit more about it and be part of that conversation. Now, for nearly a year now, we've been experiencing the pandemic, which has truly changed the world, and a lot of people have had to slow down. So, you know, usually where people wouldn't really think about things, or were really busy living a fast-paced life, as you mentioned, we're very instantaneous as individuals. We want things there and then, or, you know, we've kept ourselves so busy, we've not allowed ourselves to really think about things that have probably bothered us, or really try to understand who we are as individuals. You know, a lot of people may say, for example, you know, to me, who are you as a person? And I think the past year has really allowed me to really evaluate who I am as a person, and what I want to kind of do, and what my goals and aspirations are, prior to probably this actually happening. You know, we do live a fast-paced life. How do you think the pandemic has played a part in galvanizing the conversation around mental health?
I think it can be said that the pandemic has certainly pushed people. It's, for some people, it's pushed them to a certain extent, and for others, it's pushed them to the absolute limit, you know, to the end of their wits. You know, you find key workers who are extremely stressed. They're not getting breaks. They're not getting the rest that they need. And they're often witnessing quite horrific ordeals and scenes. So, you know, for example, seeing people within their own community passing away without their loved ones around them can be really, really traumatic. And of course, they'll need this support. So I find it amazing that actually the mental health of key workers has been a topic of conversation for many years, but actually, you know, it's taken the pandemic for us to really consider this. Not to say that, you know, the healthcare system hasn't got its problems, but at least it's a topic of conversation now. Likewise, we find young people and young adults who are still in education, you know, struggling with a new routine and a new normal, when only a matter of a few months ago things were starting to go back to normal. And the constant uncertainty can lead to, you know, a breadth of mental health issues, you know, not having faith in the system, hopelessness, helplessness, feeling like they don't have any control, as well as the lingering question of, you know, what is the point? And I think that's a shared sort of feeling amongst many people in our community, even those who are working from home. I know my mental health and well-being has plummeted since I've been having to work from home, you know, constantly in isolation, you know, not being able to do the things you would usually be able to do. Additionally, I think people have realized that in times of uncertainty, how temporary this dunya actually is, and how no amount of money or wealth or material things will be able to get you out of an unforeseen circumstance. I mean, this pandemic was completely unprecedented, right? None of us have anything that could have prepared us for it, or, you know, equipped us to deal with it. And the only thing we can truly rely on is God, and also our God-given resilience and our God-given abilities to deal with difficult situations, our spiritual health and our emotional intelligence, and how to, you know, better that, to, you know, healthily and positively react to a situation. I also think it's humbled a lot of people. Like what I said before, you know, there's nothing in this world that can stop, you know, the pandemic from spreading. And it's also removed a lot of distractions and material coping mechanisms that people usually have. So, for example, for me personally, I'm having a bad day. My instant thing would be like, okay, I'm going to go chill with some friends. We're going to go watch a movie, maybe go out to eat, you know, all that sort of stuff, go bowling, whatever it is. And now that we don't have that, that's been taken away from us, I no longer have those distractions and those things that I would use to alleviate my distress. And not having that has made me realize that actually I need to find something more sustainable. I need to find something that I can rely on within me, and something that isn't temporary in nature. And that is ultimately Allah. He's the only one that is permanent. He's the only one that doesn't disappear. And I think that has, you know, contributed to people's humility, realizing that they can only truly rely on Allah and the abilities that Allah has bestowed upon us. And one of those abilities is having the resilience to deal with these kind of situations, also having positive mental health and, you know, positive well-being.
Yeah,
sorry,
definitely.
that was a really long answer.
No, there's a lot that's come from that. You know, I think in terms of knowing that you're really stronger than what you really think you are. And I think the pandemic has taught us a lot, you know, a lot, as you've mentioned, it has been a time of uncertainty, and a lot of people have been put through things that they didn't think that they would be experiencing. And it's kind of made them realize that they're a lot stronger than what they think, you know, and that they're able to cope with a lot more than what they think they can. But also, I think what's come out of the pandemic is, you know, being more mindful and a lot about meaning and what is the meaning behind your life. And as you mentioned, faith. And I know that from kind of scouring YouTube and, you know, a lot of YouTubers, you know, a lot of them are talking about minimalism. A lot of people are talking about their homes and, you know, thinking about what they have and what they want to, you know, what they want to soak up, what they want to, you know, have in their space. And a lot of people have looked at minimalism in terms of their mind. What do you allow your mind to kind of, you know, soak up as well? So one of the things that we touched on was about the winter blues. And I read that between 3 to 6% of the people across the UK experience SAD, and 12 to 13% the winter blues. And the title mentions winter blues. So for those that are listening in, can you give us a brief definition of both?
Sure. So SAD stands for seasonal affective disorder, and it's pretty much what it says on the tin. It's a type of depression that coordinates with the seasons and usually occurs during the same seasons every year for an individual that experiences SAD. So this happens when the days get shorter and we're sort of exposed to less sunlight. And this leads to an overproduction of melatonin, and this can contribute to people feeling extremely tired, feeling lethargic, not having as much energy as they usually would. People with SAD, it's more than just the winter blues, and SAD is characterized by all those things that I just said, but experiencing it for more than 2 weeks consistently and not being able to pull yourself out of it. So it's more than just a depressed mood or a depressed episode, let's say. So if you're unable to shake these depressive feelings during the, you know, the season and whilst they change, especially if it's been more than 2 weeks, even after attempting to sort of alleviate your symptoms, then you should seek medical advice, because it could be more serious than the winter blues. And the winter blues is, you know, often known as holiday blues as well. So there is some overlap, but there's a big difference in terms of, you know, how severe your symptoms are and how long you're experiencing them for.
So in terms of some of the symptoms somebody may be experiencing, what could that be? Is it, you know, low mood? Could you elaborate on that? Sure.
So SAD is more common in women and people who live far away from the equator. So that's us in the UK. So, you know, winter daylight hours here are really short. People who, you know, there's difference of opinion. Some people say between the ages of 15 and 55. Some people say between the ages of 18 and 30. But it's really important to note here, and I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent because I think it's really important. Parents and guardians need to take note of this, because teenagers naturally would withdraw themselves or spend a lot of time in their bedroom, and often parents and guardians will pass it over as just a phase. However, it could be something more than that. So it's important to be aware of that. And those who have a relative that experiences SAD are more likely to experience SAD. And in terms of symptoms, it kind of
or any signs as well. They may do something that, you know.
So signs and symptoms, you know, including feeling down or anxious, feeling lethargic, losing an interest in usual activities that you would be interested in, and experiencing a disruption in eating habits. So, for example, eating a lot more is quite common, although you could eat less as well. Sleeping a considerable amount more than usual, but still feeling really tired, and having increased trouble concentrating. So quite agitated, not able to see a task through. And you know, this is another distinction between SAD and winter blues, is those with SAD will often experience or feel or have thoughts of hopelessness and worthlessness. And I think that's where we can make the distinction, because, for example, when you're experiencing the winter blues, you may still be able to sort of look to the future and pull yourself out of a dark place, make those goals, make those, milestones. Whereas people with SAD might, they might find it more difficult than that. And they might not be able to have the future in sight, if that makes sense. They might not be able to make those goals because it might just be, well, there's no point. I'm worthless. Nothing is ever going to get me out of this rut.
Yeah. Okay. So as I was looking at both SAD and the winter blues, some of the advice given in order to live well with this condition is, spending time outside, keeping active, seeing friends and family, and seeking support from support groups. As we know, we're in a pandemic, and with the lockdown and government recommendations to stay indoors, what are the things people can do within their home to support them, other than the conventional advice that has been given from medical specialists?
So, although government recommendations will restrict us in a number of ways, we still have the ability to be creative and intuitive. For example, working out at home is becoming more and more common. A lot of people actually find it easier. So it's highly encouraged, even if it is pacing your room, doing a few squats, or, going up the stairs once or twice more than usual, for example, doing whatever you can. If you are able to, then you should still try to go out for walks. And if you're shielding, then standing next to a window, opening the window. I know it sounds really silly, but you may just see a difference. And, I suggest that to my mum is currently shielding. So I say to her, listen, just get some fresh air through the window. You can't go out. Alhamdulillah, we're very blessed to have a garden, so I encourage her to go out into the garden. But trying to do what you can with what you have available around you will inshallah also be a reward for you, because you're making use of what Allah has provided you. Where possible, you should have social interactions, even if that means being socially distant. When it is, I can't really keep up with what's happening with the government recommendations, but obviously staying within those limits, even through FaceTime or video call. I know a lot of people are experiencing video call and screen time burnout right now. So, bear in mind of how you're feeling and how much screen time you're going to have. And even if you don't want a video call, just calling someone, voice noting, I find I'm doing more of now. Even though we're at home, you should also still be able to access therapy or counselling through the NHS or other support providers. So at Inspirited Minds, we have a support service and we provide counselling. So there's actually a lot of things that we still available for us. But also common, and I think a sister actually asked about light therapy. So a common treatment for SAD is also light therapy. You can get special sun lamps, which can be effective for people suffering from SAD and winter blues. And basically what it does, it mimics sun exposure and sunlight, which can help reset your body clock and positively impact your body's regulations of the hormones that you need. I'm not sure I articulated that well, but basically it does support with making those right hormones and basically resetting your body clock so that it doesn't think that you need to sleep all the time just because it's dark. Generally, things that are generally good for your well-being. So, for example, I don't know if you know about the 5 ways of well-being.
No, you can let us know, Sister Minha. Let us know the 5 ways.
Sure. So this is something that Mind came up with ages ago, and I did an article on it as well. And it's surprising because subhanallah, all these things that they've come up with are really deeply embedded within our Islam and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So, for example, I'll go through the ways of well-being. And the sunnah can be applied here. So number 1 is connecting with others. So we've already discussed this about, FaceTiming and messaging and stuff like that and seeing people where possible. Number 2 is being active. So we've already discussed that. And, the Prophet ﷺ was an active person as well. And we know the famous hadith about taking care of 5 before 5. You might have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's youth before your old age, health before your sickness, poverty, your health before your sickness, your free time before your preoccupation, and your life before death, I believe. Yeah. And number 3 is to take notice. Allah continuously tells us throughout the entire Quran to reflect and ponder upon his miracles and his marvels and his creation. And he's, also given us aql, so he's given us intellect and reason, and we should use that to become more reflective and more aware externally and internally. 4 is to learn. So educating yourself is empowering. And what is life without knowledge, right? So even with COVID restrictions, it's opened up many opportunities. So a lot of people are now learning from home. We can also, sign up to courses quite easily, whether it's Islamic or academic, or if it's a language, whatever it might be. There's ample sort of courses that are accessible and often free online as well. And this can have, gaining knowledge can have additional benefit and reward if you then go on to empower and teach others. Like we know the Prophet said the best type of knowledge is that which benefits others, and if you share it with others as well. And number 5 was to give. Now we know how generous the Prophet ﷺ and his companions, may Allah be pleased with them, were. And I mean, there are many benefits, as you guys know, as a Muslim charity, how many benefits there are to giving. But if we talk about mental health and well-being, it brings about a sense of responsibility, accountability, hope, and goodness from Allah. Like giving invites goodness from Allah. So it's important to remember that giving doesn't always have to be, spending money. Although if you are in a position to do so, you should. But if you're not, then you can offer your talent, you can offer your knowledge, you can offer your assistance, you can offer your time, for example. So
definitely. And, even helping your neighbors as well. I think that when I was researching the pandemic as well, they said that the UK were one of the most generous nations in terms of the time that they gave, and volunteering just expanded. People wanted to do something, they wanted to give their time, and helping your elderly neighbors or those that are shielding. There's a lot that can be done. And I think an important thing that you mentioned was about connecting. And I think at this stage as well, it's really important to connect with yourself. And I know that's something that people have been talking about is journaling and putting thoughts on paper. And I think that's really extremely important. If you feel that you're not able to talk to your friends or your family, you feel uncomfortable, or things just feel so jumbled up and you just don't know where to start, I think being able to kind of journal, get any book that you have. I've got loads in my house. Somebody's got an empty book somewhere, and just start putting your thoughts onto paper, really, just about how you're feeling. And that, inshallah, will give you some form of clarity and, put things into perspective and, make you feel like, these are things that I want to work on, and I'm able to do that. And you're able to do that in digestible chunks. So yeah, and I really like the 5 ways, actually. I think that's a really great way to kind of make, it's a really good way of putting things into perspective.
Yeah.
So you mentioned faith playing a pivotal part in uplifting someone when they feel down. Can you elaborate on this? And I know you mentioned your 5 points, but is there anything else that you could give as a form of advice for those that are listening?
Sure. So I think, and I always say this, it's important to know and important to understand that Islam isn't something that should be applied to a situation, and it's actually the situation should be looked at through an Islamic lens. And if we start anything with the name of Allah, it is undoubtedly going to be blessed, right? Yeah. And I think furthermore, truly internalizing and believing what Allah has promised, what Allah wants from his believers, how Allah tests those he loves, and the idea that that Allah doesn't sort of burden us or test us with more than that we can manage. And Allah tells us that he's not going to test us with more than what we can bear. That tells us that actually he's already given us the ability to be resilient. Allah has given us the ability to manage this, even though it might be difficult. And I appreciate that this is all very, fluffy, and it's nice to hear, and it's easier said than done. But Allah has gifted us with these strengths to overcome whatever situation we are in, no matter how difficult it may seem.
Yeah.
And he's told us that. And there are so many things that can, be spoken about here, but, and I know I'll go into a bit more detail in the article, but, it's important to remember that right now, of all the research that's come out of COVID, right, there's so much emphasis put on routine. And Islam also provides a routine. It provides a structure to our day. So, for example, praying 5 times a day at allotted time can give us small milestones to achieve throughout the day, for example. Allah encourages us to be in a constant state of remembrance and reflection. And when we are in a state of remembering Allah and reflecting what we're doing, and if we constantly bring back everything we do to Allah and His decree, it makes us more, emotionally aware. It makes us more spiritually, and it redirects our focus from this dunya to the next. And that is the ultimate end game, right? That's what we're all here for. That's what we're all striving for. And it's really important to strive for balance between faith and what Allah has given to you as a means. And I know this hadith is really overused and it's super cheesy, but there's a reason that the Prophet ﷺ told his companion to tie the camel and also make dua. So why would we not use the gifts that Allah has given around us? And I really, I try to internalize this myself. Asking for support is by default relying on Allah, because that support is God-given.
Yeah. So we're in a brand new year. It's been 20 days now since 2021 has started. And there was something that really stood out for me in the blog that you've written, which for those that are listening, you can find on the Inspirited Minds website, but you can also find it on the Muslim Hands website as well. And you mentioned that winter can be a Muslim spring. Can you tell me a bit more about this?
So that's basically a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said is the winter is the springtime of the believer. And there are other versions where it states that it's because winter's nights are long to spend in worship, and the days are short so we can fast in them. And Umar radiallahu anha also said, or has been recorded to say, that winter is the prize, or something similar to a prize of the worshippers. And if we think about it metaphorically, spring is all about blossoming and new beginning, and it's beautiful because among these dark and gloomy days, the leaves are dying, everything's mushy and cold. No one really wants to think about blossoming, right? But Allah has made it so that every day it's a chance for us to blossom. So not only is it easier for you to do acts of ibadah, so for example the fasting and the salah that Allah mentioned, and I'll go into a little bit more detail in the article, but it's for one of the things that I mentioned is that the Islamic day we know finishes at Maghrib, which is around like 4 o'clock, 4:30, 5 o'clock now. And it was even earlier a few weeks ago. And the most beloved salah to Allah is the salah of Dawood alayhi salam, who we know used to sleep for half of the night and then pray for 1/3 of the night and then go back to sleep. I might be wrong. That's me paraphrasing. And we know that the last third of the night is when Allah descends to the lowest heaven. So this is when Allah is, physically closest to us. And Allah has made it so easy for us that, and so possible for us that so early on in the evening we can approach of Him before we get tired. We can ask of Him, and it's not, subhanAllah, it's not an inconvenience for us. Like in the summer days, tahajjud, fajr is at like 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. It's difficult. Whereas now, in these winter days, Allah is literally giving it to us on the table. I don't know how better to articulate it. And also Allah loves the deeds that are small and consistent. And I think the winter time is probably the easiest time to build good habits. So I'll give you one example about salah. If somebody is struggling with doing their salah on time, the winter, there's like a trend, a common trend nowadays. Everyone says that winter is the season of wudu, right? Like you start off with one wudu in the morning, and that should survive you throughout the entire day. So, if you're struggling to do your salah on time, having your salah not so spaced out during the day can help you build that routine. And by the time it's come spring or come summer, you would have built a connection to salah that you don't miss it anymore. That you don't. It's become a good habit essentially. we can go a little bit further, I guess, so for example, a lot of people, I guess, there's this notion of starting a fresh day tomorrow, right? And having to, sit with your whole entire day's worth of emotions and experiences and stress, and, having to sit with that throughout the entire evening and all night. Whereas we know the Islamic day finishes at Maghrib. So it's almost as if we can reset after Maghrib. We can start our next day. We can start our evening, fresh, for example. I mean, that's what I found really helpful. Like, we don't have to wait for the whole day and end to finish to start again. And, pondering and reflecting is a great thing to do during the winter, because it's a great way to think about how temporary this world is. Like, the day kind of just merges into the night and vice versa. And as we know, in the pandemic, all the days are just merging into one at the moment anyway. And you can really think about how the only constant state is Allah, And one of my counselors told me a while ago that the word emotion contains the word motion. And emotions are designed to sort of drive and move through you. So you can let that motion happen. You have to remember that whatever you're experiencing right now, whatever state you're in, it's not static. And these emotions were designed to move through you, just as the seasons were designed to move, just as the day is designed to transition. Nothing is a constant state except for Allah Himself. So tomorrow is just a few hours away. So understanding that actually my tomorrow starts straight after Maghrib, I can start to let these uncomfortable emotions move through me. I can start to let these distressing thoughts just slowly fade away and into the evening, and I can begin to let them move through me. And I appreciate that this is a lot easier said than done, but it is a mindset. And this is a type of mindset that can be the easiest to build and cultivate during winter.
Yeah, definitely, in a positive mindset as well. So my next question is, New Year's often sparks fresh starts, self-care, and achieving the goals that may have slipped in the previous year, which, obviously is very positive. And as I've been on the internet, a lot of people are talking about all the things that they want to achieve this year. But in the current climate, do you think that puts pressure on people, especially during this time, to do it all? Now, for example, parents have now the role of working, looking after the home, making sure the kids are fed, but also making sure the kids are actually studying and actually, kind of taking on that teacher role as well. What do you say about, what's your kind of thoughts on fresh starts and self-care, especially during this pandemic era that we're currently living in?
My first thought is that I don't know how working any kind of parent is doing it right now. Actually, even like working parents are like crazy. May Allah give them and give them the strength to manage it. I think there is a lot of pressure to achieve, but not only that, I think there's a lot of pressure to overachieve, and there is an insane amount of expectation on us to be fully functioning as normal human beings, as well as deal with everything else that people who are struggling would have on, as well as deal with the pandemic, and then deal with the factors that have probably heightened or have been triggered because of the pandemic. And I think it's really important to know how it can get too much and it can become a really toxic sort of place and mindset to be in. And whilst I agree it is positive, you should absolutely have goals and ambitions, but it's important to make them as realistic as possible. The last thing you want to do right now is put additional pressure on yourself to be anything more than what you are and achieve anything more than what you can. And something I like to tell myself, and it's a good affirmation to have, is my ordinary is extraordinary. And it's important to remember that you always have to bring it back to intentions. What has Allah asked of me today? And if I'm achieving that, then what am I asking of myself to achieve today? And if you are meeting what Allah has asked from you, if you're doing your salah, if you're remembering Him, you're doing any additional deeds you can do, anything else that you achieve on top of that is a bonus, and I'm not just talking about salah. If you're a mother, if you're looking after your kids, if you're feeding them, anything else that you can achieve is a bonus. Like, I feel like there's this notion in society that you have to constantly be achieving something. You have to be working towards something. But actually fulfilling your absolute minimum duties that Allah has prescribed for me. Anything else that you do on top of that is a bonus. And that's not what your eye should be on. Do you know what I mean? If we go back to the parents, like, Allah has asked you to educate them, to feed them, to clothe them, to look after them, give them security. If you're doing, a 9 to 5 on top of that, and you're doing whatever other projects you have, then, it's okay. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. As long as your kids aren't jumping out of the window and you're not jumping out the window trying to go after them, then I think you're in a good place. And I think it's really important to appreciate what we can achieve. And, it's really important to shift our mindset from, I'm just achieving the minimum, to actually, I'm achieving what Allah has asked from me. And you have to be really, really, really realistic about what to expect from yourself. Like I said, it's good to be ambitious, but there's no point in being ambitious if that actually is going to have a negative impact on your life, if it's going to make you pessimistic, and if it's going to make you, negative, and if it's going to, just affect your general outlook on life and those around you. At Inspirited Minds, one of the ways that we make sure, or we attempt to achieve our goals, is we use SMART goals. And it's an acronym. So your goals should be specific. They should be measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. That smells like SMART, basically. So wherever your goals are, whether you're, whatever your goals are, make sure that they're smart, that they're specific, that they're achievable, that they're time-based. So, what I need to achieve, is this measurable? How will I know I've achieved it? Is it a certain number? Is it meeting a deadline, for example? And, is it attainable? Really, really look at yourself and think, can I do this in this time limit? And if I can't, okay, I'll budget up. And if I can, great. And, it's not that you should doubt yourself, or not, because you shouldn't underestimate yourself, but actually you want to say to yourself that if I can achieve this, great, anything I do on top of that is amazing. And it's a great way to motivate yourself, so that when you do achieve it, inshallah, you'll be able to achieve more than that. You'll be able to go beyond, and that will contribute to building a positive mindset, essentially. So I think it's a great way to make sure you're not putting too much pressure on yourself, and you set realistic expectations which are achievable.
Definitely. I think there's a couple of things that you mentioned that really struck out to me. The fact that it's about the whole acronym of SMART as well, and I think that from a faith perspective as well, that I think for me personally, I've taken this on as well, that we do live in a society where we're always chasing something, and we don't know when enough is enough. We don't know where that line is, where you feel like you reached that point where you can say, wow, like I've reached that point. We're always going to want to fulfill something that it's kind of like this endless pit. But I think one of the things that you mentioned, which I personally have really taken on board, is the fact that if I pray 5 times a day and I do the best that I can do in terms of, being a good person, helping others, doing the best at work, I feel that that's a positive. So definitely, I think that, renewing those intentions with your faith is definitely, for me personally, I will see that as a successful day. And definitely, I think as well, the whole consistency, and even our faith says that small consistent acts are bigger than big acts. And I think for those that, I know it's easier for me to say, for those that are at home and doing everything from, being parents to schooling their children and working at the same time, it's commendable what you're doing. And, definitely do things that are consistent and don't feel pressurized into having to do these new goals and smashing them, because it is a really, we're in a pandemic. And as I mentioned, it's one of the most challenging times that we've ever experienced in our lifetime. And I just wanted to kind of end on your final thoughts, and actually really want you to reiterate the 5 points that you mentioned, because I just think that really struck out for me as well. So any final points that you have, and if you can mention the 5 points again that you mentioned, because I thought that was really helpful And if there are any questions, I don't know if there are any questions that have been asked from the Facebook group.
Not that I can see. But yeah, so the 5 ways of well-being that I mentioned is sorry, I was just checking if there was any questions. No worries. So the 5 ways of well-being is so I think I can't remember if I'm going to do them in order, but one of them was to be active, right? And this is all of these 5 ways of well-being. The Sunnah is very much embedded within our Sunnah. The Sunnah can be applied to it, for example. So being active. We know the Prophet ﷺ was very active. He liked to take care of himself physically, and obviously we know that our body is an amana from Allah, and we should do what we can, make sure that we're nourishing it with the right kinds of foods. Make sure that we're doing the right kinds of activities. And I just want to reiterate that I know right now there's a lot of emphasis being put on how much we're working out, but I just want to say, especially for people who are working from home and at a desk, I know for me, I'm at a desk literally 8 till 4 every day. Stretching is a brilliant kind of exercise, and it can really help open up your lungs, and it can really help
with your posture breathing, as well.
Breathing as well. And then the second one, well, not the second one, the second one that I remember is connection. So I've done activity, connection. So making sure that, and we know that in our Sunnah as well, it's really important to uphold the ties of kinship, right? So connecting with others. Humans by default, we're social creatures. Allah has made us this way. So if you can, in a socially distant or within your social bubble, however is safe for you, do go out and see people face to face. I know that there are a lot of people we haven't seen for many months, so if you can, you should do. If not, then making that human interaction where possible, FaceTiming, video call, whatever you need to do. And like I said before, I know there's a bit of a burnout happening right now with the amount of time that we're spending on screens. So using audio, voice noting people, just calling them, having them on speaker in the background, that kind of thing.
And also reconnecting with yourself as well through journaling as well. So that's another one as well.
And then the third one was taking notice. So this is the reflection and the pondering that Allah has told us to do in the Quran. Be curious. Remember that we're strangers in this world, and there's so much of this dunya that we don't know about, that we aren't aware of, or we just haven't been able to appreciate. So capture the unusual things around you and consume what there is around you instead of consuming your screen, basically, and using your God-given intellect and reason to take in those miracles and marvels that Allah has given you. Educating yourself, we know how important educating yourself is in Islam. There's ample opportunities online now. Sign yourself up, attending more of these lives, anything that you can do to sort of broaden your horizon of knowledge. And giving, I think, is the 5th one. I think I've done all 5, but giving. So obviously we know the status that generosity and giving in charity has in Islam, but also it welcomes goodness from Allah. It's a purification, and it will give you a sense of hope, accountability, responsibility, and it's something that Allah will give back to you as well, in a number of different ways. So those are the 5 ways of well-being. But my final words, I think it would be to 100% undoubtedly try to constantly achieve the balance. And I emphasize the word try because we may go through life never being able to strike that balance, but actually our efforts aren't in vain, because every time we attempt to strike that balance, we're getting one step closer to managing our emotions, managing our situation better, reacting to certain experiences and certain situations in a much healthier and positive way. So for me, if there's one thing that I've learned this year is balancing. And that applies to anything in your life, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically, financially, environmentally, whether you're a homemaker, whether you're a lawyer, whether you work in charity, wherever you are. It's important to remember that Islam is the middle path. We're not too slack, we're not too strict, and it's a lifestyle, and that's what we need to treat Islam as. It's not an add-on at the end of the day. It's not a matter of rituals that you do 5 times a day. It's not a checkbox activity, it's a way of life, and it's a life that is of balance. And inshallah, with that, it'll lead to contentment, we hope, inshallah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sister Minha. And just lastly, if anybody wants to kind of find out more about Inspirited Minds or read more about what we spoke about, just want to reiterate that myself and Minha, we're not medical professionals. So if there is anything that you want to find out more about, then you can go on the Inspirited Minds website, which is
www.inspiritedminds.org.uk, or you can find us on all socials, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah. And, we would definitely recommend to go to seek medical support. And if you want to know more about Muslim Hands, then please visit our website, which is muslimhands.org.uk. You can find the blog that Inspirited Minds was so generous to donate to. So you can read that, which is under our latest news. And as Minha mentioned, one of the 5 ways to feel good about yourself is giving. And we have various projects on Muslim Hands website, which you can donate to. But also giving is not just about giving charity, but it's also to give a smile to somebody, to donate your time, supporting your neighbors that may need it. There's a lot under giving. So thank you so much, Sister Minha, for your time. It was really educational on my part, and also inspiring to speak to you, inshallah, and hopefully we will do something like this again. So thank you so much. Take care. Bye.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.